Welcome back, everyone. My name is Kimvie Phillips. I am the curator for race and ethnicity at the Schlesinger Library. Thank you. I just want you all to join me in welcoming our next panel on feminism, which will be moderated by Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, the Victor S. Professor of History and African American Studies here at Harvard.
Thank you. I sincerely thank Jane Kamensky and Rebecca Wasserman and Kimvie Phillips and our dean, Tomiko Brown-Nagin, and of course, Elizabeth Hinton, and the whole staff who've worked to make this possible. This has been truly a wonderful, wonderful occasion. And of course, we honor Angela Davis and her giving the papers to Harvard. You know, I was thinking after listening to the last conversation about courage. It really takes courage to stand up and to speak when you don't know what others will think about what you're going to say, when you recognize that what you have to say and do will be unpopular with a lot of people, and you just don't know what the outcome will be for you. But it is far more courageous to be able to stand up and speak right to the face of forces of power when you know what the outcome will be. When you know you could possibly lose your job, as Angela Davis first did. You could possibly go to jail. And when she first went to jail, she didn't know she was going to win that case. She had faith, but the outcome could have been so different. And yet, that courage to stand up and to stand up for right and to do right, this is why we thank you so much, Angela Davis. So in 2013, and I quote her, Angela Davis stated this: "Feminism involves so much more than gender equality, and it involves so much more than gender. Feminism must involve a consciousness of capitalism. I mean the feminism that I relate to," this is what she says. "And there are multiple feminisms. It has to involve a consciousness of capitalism and racism and colonialism and post-colonialities and ability and more genders than we can even imagine, and more sexualities than we ever thought we could name." So our panel this morning captures this plural meaning of feminisms. And in the many forms that feminisms characterize, we will think about the life and work of Angela Davis and have a conversation. We will hear about bringing a feminist consciousness to film, to teaching in global contexts, to inspiring creative artists, and to understanding the theoretical and intellectual work of Black left feminism. And we have a distinguished panel. We have filmmaker and director Julie Dash, who is a professor in the Department of Art and Visual Culture at Spelman College. We have Gina Dent, a professor in feminist studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Farah Griffin, Jasmine Griffin. A professor in a lot of different departments, English, comparative literature, and African American studies at Columbia University. And we have Barbara Ransby, professor in African American Studies, Gender and Women's Studies, and History at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So we're going to begin now. We're going to begin our conversation. Thank you.
Start with me? Yes. Okay. So wait, no, I have a question. We're going to talk. Okay. So, Julie, you are involved in making a film about Angela Davis. Yes. And she's making it for Lionsgate Pictures, which is really a big deal, and it's very exciting, and we cannot wait to see this. So we'd love to hear about it, and I'm especially curious to hear your thoughts and your challenges, and perhaps even questions that haunt you. Mm-hmm. You as a Black woman, because after all, you are a Black woman film director in a largely, overwhelmingly actually, white, male Hollywood film industry. Mm-hmm. So how do you portray Angela Davis's life and your own efforts to give voice to Black women's consciousness and concerns?
Okay. Well, I'm both encouraged and deeply haunted through this process. But as you mentioned, I teach at Spelman College within the Department of Art and Visual Culture. One of my courses is called Hollywood and Histories. We screen films made inside of the studio system that focus on histories and biographies and events and issues surrounding our presence in the African diaspora. It's a course designed to expose students to narrative film genres, theories, and critical analysis related to production practices, editing, and the marketing of dramas depicting us. The objective of the course is to take a critical look at scripted narratives that portray real people, actual events, and especially the depiction of African Americans. So, students analyze how ideas and images are represented and valued in narrative film, some documentaries, and a little bit of television. So 1 year ago, in 2018, I joined a team of veteran creatives and producers at Lionsgate Pictures to help them develop and eventually to direct the upcoming biographical film about Angela Yvonne Davis. My producers include Issa Davis, Sidra Smith, Nina Yang Bon Jovi, and Mike Pasternak. Brian Tucker is the screenwriter, and I have the opportunity to work with him overseeing the scripting of what I pitched to the studio, an epic biopic. A movie that falls within the genres of being a political thriller. Yeah. The biopic will cover the period of Angela's early years in Birmingham on Dynamite Hill from age 14 and living with her family through age 26 through the trial of the century, as described by one of the speakers yesterday as one of the greatest moments in the history of freedom. So once again, this is daunting. I am haunted and encouraged by this opportunity to share Angela's story with a global audience. Because I have made Black history movies of the week before, and this ought not be that. Yeah. Directing a feature-length film, a feature-length narrative film, revolves around the questions we ask and the choices we make during production, pre-production, and in production. On a normal day on a film set, there are about 400 questions asked of the director, and I'm not kidding, 400. And if we don't answer these questions, if we don't make decisions, someone will make those decisions for us. So we have to be ready in a deep and meaningful way. Okay. So, before we get on the set and during the development period, which we are in now, and in fact, we're on our 6th iteration of the screenplay, but I'm still encouraged. Pre-production and heavy research and development will determine whether the final film will play to the audience like a Lifetime movie made for television or something more powerful, something more meaningful, something inspirational, transformative, memorable. So allow me to share with you some of the self-directed questions I ask of myself as we develop this extraordinary film project and as the screenplay is being written. As a filmmaker, first and foremost, I'm interested in redefining how African American women are depicted in historical dramas, about reimagining their lives in bold and epic cinematic displays, creating visual metaphors that replace the spoken word, showing, evoking emotions and actions without saying a word. I think that's more powerful. Where do we begin the story of the making of a revolutionary? How to show the seeds of Black radicalism taking root? I pitched Aleppo. In 2017, the faces of the children in Aleppo captured the hearts and minds of the world. But Black children in Birmingham, 1947 through 1965, suffered that same kind of trauma from the bombing attacks. Have we ever seen the faces of our children among the rubble? My intention is to fade in on Dynamite Hill when Angela is 14 years old. That societies and filmmakers generally prioritize the heteronormative male point of view in their stories, even when the movie is about a woman. How do we begin to reimagine all of that? As a storyteller, this has always been a concern of mine, and there's a constant struggle to correct that myopic viewpoint, that worldview we're constantly resetting. We start with the tiny specifics, the visual nuances, tone, and texture. How do I do this best in a 2-hour movie and for a wide and general audience? We cannot think narrowly about the storied life of Angela Yvonne Davis, nor her family, nor the extended families that raised her. Yet the constant battle, what's always staring me in the face, is that single story. It's what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie talks about, the dangers of the single story. And Sam Cooke sang about it in 1964. I was born by the river in a little tent, and just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know now change is gonna come. We are not doing that. Okay. How to depict Angela's political journey. A complex story like Margaret von Trotter's Rosa Luxemburg, perhaps, or Oliver Stone's JFK, or Pontecuevo's The Battle of Algiers, or Florian Don Hanushak's The Lives of Others, or Oliver Assayas' limited series Carlos. Those inspire me. We have to move past the chick flick genres that people are so comfortable with, that kind of slice of life, coming of age story. Would you be interested in seeing Angela on screen, a story presented as an international political thriller? Can Angela Davis be as fluid as John Wick? Yeah. Will a wide and general audience be able to parse Angela's philosophical ideas, her critical thinking, the Black radical tradition, Black liberation, her association with various factions of the Black Panther parties, the Communist Party, USA, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the US Organization, Students for a Democratic Society, Black Liberation Army, Black Guerrilla Family, Weather Underground, Iwakun, Brown Bullocks, Republic of New Africa, Revolutionary Action Movement, and all of the other organizations that reflect the time and space of her political journey, which they say, do you have to have them all in there? Some kind of way, yes. Yeah, yes. Can we talk about the Game of Thrones? There were a cast of hundreds, names we had to write down to try to pronounce. And they say to me, oh, do we have to have this name and that? Does everyone need a name? And I say, yes. We shall name them. Do you remember Daenerys' dragons? Rhaegar, Viserion, and Drogon? People know those names. So they need to know the names of Ernesto Che Guevara and Patrice Lumumba as well. Yeah. So we intend to honor the lives of those individuals and events and issues, calling them out by name as they impact upon the story of Angela Davis, Fania Davis, Margaret Berman, Bettina Aptica, Kendra Alexander, Franklin Alexander, Charlene Mitchell, George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, Rochelle McGee, Herbert Marclusa, and of course, Che Lumumba and Ernesto Che Guevara. Then we come to 68, which they want me to hurry up and get to Los Angeles. Okay, Los Angeles is fine, but there's so much story before Los Angeles. But once she does get to Los Angeles, what about the Vince Ramos Brigade? And they say, what? And I say, yeah, they're celebrating their 50th anniversary now. Could you imagine that? Angela Davis participated in the first Vince Ramos Brigade. And they say, well, we'll have to Google it. And it was like, well, that's good. Google it, and once you see the movie, once the movie is made, you'll know more. Yeah? COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program, they aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. That's a big part of this story. Mm-hmm. Angela Davis joined the Che Lumumba Club, a faction of the American Communist Party. And they said, what, it's not the same? It's like, no. Wouldn't it be helpful if we inform the audience about her history and association with these iconic activists and political leaders before we bring up their names? That means we have to introduce these subplots. Wouldn't you be interested in seeing those? Yeah, good. So Act 1. The goal is to create compelling, authentic stories around Angela that speak to the spirit of the times and show how she interacts with the historical events, issues, and movements. Act 2, facts are stranger than fiction. Mm-hmm. Act 3, the trial of the century, one of the greatest moments in the history of freedom. Radical imagination requires courage, and we've talked about that a lot today. Angela has exhibited this throughout her life. And it's now my time to be courageous and to follow her lead in the making of the Angela Davis biopic. Thank you. Thank
you. Well, Gina Dent. So the historic activism of Angela Davis, we all know, is recognized over the world. And yet it's equally true that Angela Davis's radical commitments have taken her in the form of teacher in a transnational scholarly way. And over the years and recently, she has taught, and you've co-taught with her, on such subjects as transnational feminism and abolition feminism. And she's taught in Brazil and Colombia
and also at the European Graduate School and many other places. So we'd love for you to share your thoughts and memories of teaching experiences with Angela in some of those places, and about the subject matter of the courses and what she cares about when she's in those settings.
Thank you, Evelyn. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are conducting this conference. And I want to thank all of the organizers, of course, and I think all of them have been named, but I especially want to thank Kemby Phillips, Amber Moore, and Johan, I'm sorry, John, I don't know your last name right. Sinclair, sorry, who came to our house and were kind and funny and played with our dog and made the experience of having your life dragged out of your house one that I'll never forget. So thank you so much. And thank you for the labor that you have put in to working with every page of that collection. I've had the opportunity to work with Angela now for almost 30 years. So, and I guess I should start by saying that the reason I think her teaching is important is because Angela is always a student first. In teaching with her and in her teaching in general, I see the incredible joy that she has when she learns something new, and especially her openness to learning from people in every situation, of every age, of every kind of stature. In fact, the way that I opened by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land is something that we learned when we were traveling, as we do almost every year, to Australia to be a part of a conference called Sisters Inside. The conference is now called, usually, Is Prison Obsolete? But it involves friends of ours who have been doing work for women who have been inside, but it's also an abolitionist feminist organization. And Cassandra Shaler, who is here, has been with us several times and works with us. Cassandra, who has worked with us since her days as a graduate student when she and Angela conjured up in an office somewhere with, I think with Gita Drury, right? With Gita, the idea for critical resistance. That learning that Angela always exemplifies and the collaboration that she engages in is something that I think it's hard for people normally to see. So I think that's really my role, is to talk a little bit about what I have had the opportunity to see by traveling with her. We are fortunate that we get to teach in multiple parts of the world, and I'll just name a few. I'm naming the European Graduate School first because we were there in August of 2018 in Sofia. We were actually on video in Malta a few days ago. But and what I remember was that we were doing a course on aesthetics and Black politics in the wake of Black Lives Matter. And but what we really wanted to do was show our theoretical foundations. And I don't think Angela got more excited than the day that she was talking about Kant and Marcuse. I mean, it's not even funny. That's you know, she was just giddy, and the students were kind of looking and wanting to ask us about, you know, what's happening with Black Lives Matter, which we, of course, were going to talk about. But she wanted them to understand and to feel her foundations in philosophy, how much she took from the German tradition, but also which part of that tradition. So not, of course, about fetishizing continental philosophy or the German tradition, but about the radical part of that she had absorbed. In fact, Terry Lynn Carrington, our dear friend, who's, where are you? Are you here? Who provided that amazing music for us yesterday, she asked Cecile McLaurin-Salvant to sing the Pirate Jenny. But what Terry didn't actually know at the time is that that song is not only important to Angela because it was sung by Nina Simone, whose version we, of course, adore until we heard Cecile, so now we have more. But because of the lyric by Bertolt Brecht and the story about class subjugation and resistance and fight, and the story from the perspective of either the prostitute or the working maid. And so it's those ingredients that I think Angela is able to share in the classroom that help others understand how what sometimes sounds like a very strong but simple statement from Angela has behind it a deep life work in thinking philosophically. And I think this conference is an opportunity for us to recognize that. But I want to go now, because we just returned from Brazil a couple of days ago, to talk about a relationship that we've established there with primarily Black feminists, but not all, because I think that relationship has been the most profound in many ways. Partly because the Brazilian environment is so conducive to the things that are the most important to Angela. What we now call intergenerational relationships, but often those are very static, like a young person is supposed to be assigned to talk to an older person. But in that environment, with our students and with everyone else, people are always hugging us. There's a lot of just an experience of living in equality with each other that's so important. And there's never a division between music and art and the other subjects that we might be teaching. So I'll just give you a few moments from our years of teaching there, which started in 2008. We first were teaching in Salvador da Bahia at the university there, and this, in 2008, was only 6 years after the affirmative action legislation was passed in Brazil. And so at that time, and to some extent today, there really were not enough Black feminist faculty members. And at the time, there were also very few Black students in school. So our first experience there was in being a part of teaching graduate students and faculty who wanted to learn about feminisms. We also did something on abolition feminism and a number of other subjects, but wanted to be able to bring that into their communities. And of course, our first reaction was that the unidirectionality of travel of ideas was deeply disturbing to us. The way in which we were always privileged, we were not expected to know about the work of people like Lely Gonzalez, Luisa Barros, I could go on, and the generosity that people had when they realized that actually we had met and studied and knew about this work and that it's very important to us. So what was even more exciting was when we moved our course from Salvador, the capital, to a place called Cachoeira. Cachoeira is a small village. It has a very historical legacy, which I would tell you about if I had more time. But what is important to understand about that region is that we were entering what was a very new university system. In fact, that university system is being built even to today. This is the Federal University of Recôncavo da Bahia, which is Recôncavo is a region that is mostly Black and where people had never had access to higher level education. And when we first went to a city away from Cachoeira called Cruz das Almas, we went to a conference. We were coming for Black Consciousness Week, and we were going to give talks, and we were preparing our little academic talks to be shared. And we ended up arriving and seeing huge tents, like circus tents, and thinking, wow, where are we? And seeing thousands of people hungry to be a part of this knowledge. Brazil, for us, exemplifies the question I think we always put at the center of our courses, which is, what is knowledge? Knowledge is not the information you know, but how you are taught to know, allowed to think. And when we finished our conversations that day and the conference was ending, we saw a stage being loaded up, and musicians started arriving, and all of the conference participants joined with all the people from around the town, and there was a huge party and concert. And every night in Brazil has been for us like that. We have a day of work, and we have a day where that work bleeds out into the community, and we all come to understand really why we're doing that work together. There is obviously so much more I could say, but I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Farah Griffin. Angela Davis has played an influential and in fact, pioneering role in regard to specific scholarly trends. And we in the history profession call these turns in history. You know, you study one thing and then you have a new thing that's hot, so it's the turn in history. And I'm thinking, for example, of her early work on enslaved women, which actually preceded the burst of histories on gender and slavery that emerged in the mid-1980s. And more recently, Angela Davis's work on prison abolition, which precedes the more recent carceral turn in academic studies, particularly in history and sociology and law. And yet, these and other writings by her have also spoken to and about the creative arts. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about how the creative and critical works have been influenced by Angela Davis, the artistic turn, so to speak, that emerged in the wake of her publications.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, everyone, the organizers and everyone who's already been thanked. And I also want to thank Gina, who, as her friend, I know was on the other side in California getting those boxes ready. So thank you, Gina, for your contributions to this remarkable archive. So since the 70s, Angela's scholarship and theorizing and activism, as we all know, have been at the forefront of new ways of thinking about the past, but also of helping to strategize and mobilize us for present struggles to transform oppressive structures. She has identified very important areas that Evelyn mentioned for further investigation. And as we heard last night, her courage and commitments have also inspired artists, musicians, but also creative writers and visual artists as well. And I think we should also note that she finds inspiration and community with artists. I'm struck by the way throughout the past 50 years, Angela consistently situates her work as part of a critical conversation, and I always read it as an invitation to join her in thinking about the process of creating visions, building frameworks, as well as building the society towards which her work gestures. So it's not surprising that her work has inspired a number of critical and creative responses, all of which enrich our analyses, but also our capacity to imagine alternative past and alternative futures. In the time that I have, I want to return us to that important essay of 1971, The Black Woman's Role in the Community of Slaves, that Bettina spoke about last night. I thought, oh, well, there, it's already been said, but I'm going to do it anyway. Given the importance of this essay and the ways that it has been cited and republished, it's also republished, as an individual essay, almost 50 years since its appearance. I wanted to talk about the context of its original publication. It's the opening essay of Volume 3, Number 4 of The Black Scholar, published in 1971. And as Bettina reminded us last night, it was written while Angela was incarcerated at the Marin County Jail in California. And the editor's preface to the essay explains the incidents leading to her arrest, suggests a continuity between the context in which she produced the essay and its subject, which argues for the numerous and variety of ways that enslaved Black women resisted the institution of slavery. It situates, the preface does, Davis and her contemporaries as the legacy of an anonymous group of foremothers who not only ensured the survival of Black people, but worked actively to overthrow the system of slavery. But if you do a quick perusal of the issue's table of contents, you see that Davis's contribution is among a number of works by Black women intellectuals, all her contemporaries. I found this fascinating going back and reading it. Among them, Race, Revolution, and Women by Shirley Chisholm, who would launch her presidential campaign the following month in January 1972. Tanzanian Women and Nation Building by Joyce Ladner, the former SNCC member, mentee of Medgar Evers, and sociologist whose groundbreaking work, Tomorrow's Tomorrow, The Black Women, which had an opening chapter on women and slavery, had been published the year before. Black Women in America, an annotated bibliography by the anthropologist, educator, and future president of Spelman and Bennett Colleges, Janetta Cole. And that bibliography contains work that stretched well beyond the borders of the United States, including a section on socialism and women. The volume also included an interview with Kathleen Cleaver. So it's worth noting that this issue of Black Scholar appeared during a moment rich in brilliant publications by Black women, which sought to critically analyze their condition in the US and explored their relationships to Black men in the Black Power movement, as well as their varying responses to the largely white women's liberation movement. That same year, recall, Toni Cade Bambara's edited volume, The Black Woman, was published, as was Toni Morrison's first novel, The Bluest Eye, and Alice Walker's first novel, The Third Life of Grange Copeland, and Audre Lorde's collection of poetry, second collection of poetry, Cables to Rage. Not since the New Negro Renaissance of the 20s were as many Black women writing and publishing works centered on their specific histories and experiences and their relationships to broader social and political struggles. Davis was part of this vibrant whirlwind, and at this time, few of these women identified as feminists, although many of them would go on to be leading Black feminist theorists and activists. But here, in this context, we see them laying the groundwork for the emergence of a Black feminism, which would greatly contrast from the individualistic liberal feminism that sought equality, access, and a seat at the table. Instead, they called for a whole-scale dismantling and transformation of the world they inhabited. As early as 1971, before the word feminism appears in her writing, Angela, like other Black women, understood that in slavery, quote, and I quote her here, the benefits of the ideology of femininity did not accrue to the enslaved woman. When read in this context, when it was written, one gets a sense of the dynamism of Davis's work and the period in which it emerges. And she makes no claim of a definitive analysis of the position of the enslaved woman, but instead refers to her piece as a, quote, collection of ideas which would constitute a starting point, a framework within which to conduct a rigorous reinvestigation of the Black woman as she interacted with her people and her oppressive environment during slavery. So as with Angela's work, from then on, it is a starting point and an invitation, a call to others to participate in this reevaluation of Black women's historic place in the ongoing Black freedom struggle. In the article, Davis debunks Moynihan's pernicious myth of the Black matriarchy and provides an alternative historical perspective. And we see Angela Davis, the critical theorist, who provides theoretical depth to her narrative of this history. But most importantly, she turns to instances of Black women's resistance, from the quotidian domestic activity that ensured the survival of the Black family, which she understood to exist beyond biological ties, to the more explicit participation in actual revolts. She transforms the way we think about resistance. And the essay ends with a statement that has proven to be a most consistent thread in Angela's scholarship and activism. She writes, quote, as heirs to a tradition of supreme perseverance and historical resistance, we must hasten to take our place wherever our people are forging toward freedom. Even at this moment, yes, we're clapping for it. Even at this moment, Angela's notion of taking our place in struggles for freedom extends beyond persons of African descent, whereby all people suffering the ravages of racism, imperialism, and capitalism are our people. In the decades following the publication of Reflections on the Black Woman's Role, a number of scholars responded to Davis's call by creating a body of work that challenged pervasive myths about Black women during slavery and that argued for their centrality in any understanding of that institution. And among these, we might include works by Jacqueline Jones, Deborah Gray White, and the late Stephanie Camp. But one of the most interesting and compelling responses to Davis's call is actually a work of fiction. Shirley Ann Williams' short story or novella, Meditations on History, which was published in 1980, opens with a quotation from the Davis's essay, Reflections on the Black Woman's Role. It's an epigraph. And then she dedicates the story to Angela Davis. Now, some readers are familiar with Williams's novel Dessa Rose, but Dessa Rose evolved from the novella, and I prefer the novella. We can talk about why later on, yeah. In both works, Williams responds to William Styron's fictionalized history, Confessions of Nat Turner, by imagining the enslaved woman Dessa, who is inspired by the women Davis urged her readers to seek. Dessa is a lover, a wife, a mother-to-be, an enslaved woman, and a revolutionary. And at the story's opening, she is awaiting her execution by hanging for having led an uprising on a slave coffle. She was initially sold because she attacked her master for having murdered her beloved husband, Cain. Her mistress, suspecting that Dessa's violence is the consequence of a sexual relationship with the master, has the visibly pregnant slave branded on her genitals and sold. But on the coffle, Dessa plans and starts a rebellion during which several white men died. Her execution is delayed until the birth of her child. But by the story's end, with the assistance of her fellow rebellious comrades, she escapes once again from the prison. So I've devoted my time to a discussion of Davis's early essay, the context of its production within a community of radical Black women thinkers, and its reverberation in later works of history, but especially of literature. And I think a similar review of her subsequent work, from Women, Race, and Class and Women, Culture, and Politics to Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism, and her more recent work on prison abolition, on Ferguson and Palestine, is certain to yield similar findings. The earlier works turned our attention to the historical past that included the work of radical women, that reminded feminism of its own struggles with race and class, and once again prompted other studies of radical women, like a fuller-length biography on Claudia Jones. By the time we get to Blues Legacies in 1998, Angela has gone in search of what she calls, quote, unacknowledged traditions of feminist consciousness in working-class Black communities, hints of feminist attitudes that emerge from their music through the fissures of patriarchal discourse. Here, she is interested in social consciousness amongst Black working peoples, and she asks, what might we learn from the music if we take the music makers seriously for the ideas that they articulate and transmit? Angela is always in dialogue, always in collaboration, always using her visibility to bring forward other lesser-known voices and struggles and to encourage new work. Her style of intellectual leadership, like her way of being in the world, invites, gestures toward a collective project to which we all have something to contribute. Last night, the extraordinary musicians demonstrated their love for Angela in part by playing the music that she has inspired. But we would be remiss to not note that the exchange goes both ways. Angela is inspired by the music and by musicians, and she works in partnership with them. One example is the new and innovative Berkeley Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, founded and directed by Terry Lynn Carrington. For which Angela, Gina, and I serve on the board. And under Terry's leadership, the Institute asks us to envision jazz without patriarchy. It is not, and this is important, it is not an institute of women and jazz, right? But it is an institute of gender justice, This is the work of transforming jazz culture, and in so doing, helping to build a more just world. So in closing, perhaps one of the greatest gifts of Angela and her work is that by reevaluating the past and by examining the present through a lens informed by a radical gender analysis, she helps all of us to open and free our own imaginations so that we may envision and create alternative institutions, societies, and futures which we, together, bring into being through our scholarship, our activism, and our art. Thank you, Angela.
So Barbara Ransby, you have written prize, and if you haven't read Barbara Ransby, please do. You have written prize-winning biographies of radical Black women of earlier generations. And of course, I'm referring to your biographies of Ella Baker and Eslanda Robeson. So thinking of Angela Davis and her generation, which is obviously a later generation, within this pantheon of Black left feminists, what would you describe as some of her most, Angela's, important intellectual or theoretical interventions, along with her political activism, in regard to feminism, or its plural, feminisms, as our panel is titled?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I just have to say, you know, I've learned so much and been touched so much by every single speaker and moderator. And I was sitting in the audience before. I don't think I can, sorry for other people who've been on other panels at other conferences that I've been at, but I can't say that I can say that. And who else could convene this array of forces but Angela Davis? So thank you for that introduction, and thanks to all the Harvard team that has pulled this conference together. And I want to say a special thank you also to Gina Dent for all the ways, large and small, under the radar, that she has helped to make this event successful, and for her own activism and scholarship. I am thrilled that this archive is open. I hope that it becomes a hub for research on revolution, feminism, and abolition for generations to come. I hope it becomes a place for discovery, debate, inspiration, collaboration, and conspiracy. I hope that it is a place where new revolutionary theories are hatched and then hitched to movements that will make them real in the world. Angela Davis reminds us of the importance of the past, the urgency of the present, and the possibilities we can imagine for the future. I am so honored to call her my friend, my colleague, and my comrade. Given that, I would be remiss not to remind us that we gather here on the grounds of this privileged and illustrious institution, that the people and the struggles who have meant the most to the life and work of Angela Davis are currently in motion all over the world. From Santiago to Damascus, to Barcelona, to Port-au-Prince, to the streets of Chicago, where we are now in the second week of a militant teacher strike, and to the Rojava Autonomous Region in northern Syria, where brave Kurdish women, socialists, feminists, anarchists are fighting for their lives. So let us remember also the Patois, the Massachusetts, the Wampanoag, the indigenous peoples that Gina evoked, and also let's remember our enslaved ancestors whose stolen labor helped to build institutions like Harvard. So with that, let me turn to Evelyn's question. I would like to respond to that question by talking about Angela Davis's remarkably consistent and unapologetically evolving Black left feminist praxis. That is a rubric under which I best understand her work. In preparation for today's panel, I thought to myself, I should like to spend some time with my sister to hear how she wants us to talk about her life. But of course, that was not possible this time. She was going all over the world doing what she does. And so I settled for spending some time with her virtually. But instead of revisiting her text, I wanted to see her. I wanted to hear her. So I vicariously traveled with her to Vienna, to Sao Paulo, to Pretoria, to Barcelona, and to Paris. Not bad, huh? I listened to speech after speech and interview after interview with a lot of ashes and secular amens along the way. And what I heard reminded me much of what I already knew, but it also underscored for me the depth, breadth, and power of Angela's ideas, her worldview, and most importantly, her practice. She is a sister that shows up, and she shows up for people and in places that many people do not. Let me insert a quote here that I think is relevant to our conversation, and it might be familiar to you, and I'm going to add a little sass to it for effect. Feminism? I'm not a feminist. I'm a Black revolutionary woman. Now, as many of you know, this is a quote from Angela herself, a quote that she has cited many times referring to her younger self, herself of the 1960s and 70s and even early 80s. But Angela is nothing if not dynamic. The world has changed over the past 30 years, and she has too, as have all of us. But more importantly for us and for history, Angela Davis has changed the very meaning of the category feminist. She has stretched it. She has recolored it. She has fortified it. She has poked holes in it. In the process, she has made it habitable and meaningful and a tool for resistance for an entire generation of young Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, queer, trans, disabled, and radical white women and men. She has insisted on a definition of feminism that is militantly anti-racist, that resists imperialism and settler colonialism. A feminism that operates against the very logics of heteropatriarchy. She has framed a feminist politics that opposes the carceral state and is anti-capitalist to its core. I want to repeat that last part because it often gets left off. She has framed a feminist politic that is anti-capitalist to its core. And I like that sound. I want that person in every audience I'm in. She has done this through her words, yes, elegant, insightful, and provocative, but she has also done this through her deeds. Intersectional is the word we use, but Angela Davis has embodied an intersectional practice long before it had a name. I'm going to repeat that too. Angela Davis has embodied an intersectional praxis long before it had a name. She has traveled through the world over the last 30 years, conscious, choreographed, deliberate, and representing a legible body of political work, a Black left feminist praxis in motion. She not only tells us what Black left feminism sounds like, she shows us what it looks like. For example, when our beloved sister, the glorious and notorious BGS, Beverly Guy Sheftall, took on the challenge to build a professional organization for radical transnational feminist scholars and scholars of color, Angela committed to showing up. Year after year, conference after conference, and her presence was truly transformative. Many students and younger scholars came first to see her and maybe get a selfie, but they stayed to listen, and her words seeped into their narratives, their theories, and their practice. I have seen it. When the Palestinian sexual torture survivor, our sister Rasmea Odeh, was being threatened with deportation, Angela Davis did not shy away from that campaign to defend Rasmea. She stood with Rasmea without hesitation and at great personal risk and inconvenience. This grew out of her long-standing commitment to justice in Palestine, and more immediately out of the commitment that she made, the radical commitment that she made during our Indigenous Transnational Feminists of Color delegation to Palestine in 2011 that Robin Kelly referenced earlier. That delegation included Gina Dent, Premila Nadasen, Beverly Guy Sheftall, Chandra Mahanti, and Rabab Abdul Hadi. Half of that delegation is here today. More recently, when 4 progressive women congresswomen were and still are under siege for being accountable to the movements and communities that produced them, Angela Davis again agreed to show up in solidarity, to speak up, to stand up in the sun on a especially hot DC afternoon. And her presence, her words were a powerful inspiration. We had 3 sitting members of Congress quoting and praising Angela Davis with the US Capitol in the background. It was a beautiful day. And finally, there was a time last year that she showed up at the gates of Stateville Prison outside Chicago, where a number of us have taught classes over the years. Angela was one of the 2018 commencement speakers. And with discipline and humility and what we can only term enormous political grace, she arrived in Chicago late one night, got up before 7 a.m. to be picked up by Beth Ritchie, and then stood around for hours at the prison while the other commencement speaker, a very famous young rap artist who shall remain unnamed, kept the graduates and attendees waiting for quite a long time. In that instance, she did not complain. She was worried about the incarcerated students who were waiting in much more uncomfortable circumstances. She had shown up for a bunch of guys from the tough streets of Chicago who have admittedly done harm to others in their lives. Men with 8th grade educations, with troubled pasts and dim futures. And she said, "You matter to us, you are our brothers." That is what radical Black left feminism looks like through Angela Davis's lens. And there are other examples. And there are other examples, too many to list, but I will name a few. There is her work over many years, again, that Gina mentioned, with Sisters Inside, a group of women in Australia fighting against prisons and prison conditions. There is her leadership role in introducing the prison industrial complex into our political vocabulary, challenging us to imagine a time when prisons will no longer exist, and then helping to found critical resistance along with Ruthie Gilmore and others. There is her choice to speak out in defense of Assata Shakur and other political prisoners and exiles. Each of these decisions is a choice. There was her presence in Ferguson, Missouri after the uprising there and the murder of Mike Brown in 2014. And I have to say, I interviewed a lot of the young people who were on the streets of Ferguson at that time, and they were a little skeptical of some of the older, veteran activists who showed up. But they had a different view of Angela. And I asked one of them, why was Angela so special? They said because she came to stand with us, she didn't come to mold us and scold us. Oh, my God. I won't clap too much because I don't have much time. Her delivery of the 17th annual Stephen Biko Lecture in Pretoria, South Africa in 2016 at the height of the Fees Must Fall movement, where she unequivocally stood in solidarity with the protesting students, telling them, quote, she could not have imagined that the 2 decades earlier, two decades after the defeat of apartheid, that we would be confronted with a militaristic response to people's activism. She knew what side she was on. In Angela Davis's words, she insists, I'm not talking about bourgeois feminism. I'm not talking about glass ceiling feminism. I'm not talking about simply supporting women who are already at the top. I am talking about those at the bottom. She made a place for her politics and our politics in radical feminism, and she has made radical Black left feminism an indispensable part of how we understand, think, and talk about the Black radical and revolutionary tradition. And she has not only inserted her own voice into the discourse, she brought a lot of other voices with her. The robust and rebellious sexual politics of cultural workers like Ma Rainey and Billie Holiday, the edginess of Black club women, and today, the powerful challenges posed by Black trans women and Palestinian women and incarcerated women. So that is what the Black left feminist praxis of Angela Davis looks like to me. It is one of depth and generosity, courage, and most of all, integrity. It is not neat, it is not safe, it is not self-righteous. Today we honor Angela Davis as an insurgent intellectual, but also as someone who shows up when it's hard, when it's cold, and when it's inconvenient, and sometimes when it's dangerous. She shows up for our people. She shows up for the oppressed people of the world. That is what she has steadily pushed, is a political vision of a more just society, of a post-capitalist world, of a world without prisons, of a society that is radically inclusive and holds a place for all of us, and that centers beauty, joy, music, and justice. In one of her many speeches, Angela concluded with the following: even though there are never guarantees that we will reach the future we dream, we cannot stop dreaming and we cannot stop struggling. I'm thrilled to know Angela as a friend and colleague and sister. You inspire us to keep dreaming and keep struggling, even if we may not benefit from the results, and we are enormously grateful.
Barbara.
So what I'd like to do now is just to get you to, one by one, just briefly say something about how you feel Angela Davis's legacy influences or informs your life and thinking in some way.
Well, let me start. There's an old film term called persistence of vision. It was used mostly when we were, working with celluloid film stock, and when that film stock was projected at 24 frames per second, persistence of vision, your mind made it look like a single frame in an image. And when I think of Angela, I think of her persistence of vision in her work as a scholar, intellectual, and an activist. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
Wow. I think this is also a theme earlier about, I think Robin mentioned this, about the sacrifices that will have to be made. I mean, all of us, we lose things because of the statements we make. But not thinking of that as a tragedy, of experiencing the joy of struggle and realizing that the people that we're with make us feel like we're in a completely different world. And that's the world that I've been privileged to share with Angela and with people all over the world. And so in thinking about that, I'm remembering, because I think it was, I'm losing all track, I think it was Fania last night who said that Angela always focuses on the community, and it's always about that. And we were, as I said, recently in Brazil, and so we were, among other things, there to honor Marielle Franco. And Presente. And Angela consistently quoted her while we were there with a famous phrase, which I think also stands for her, which is "Eu sou porque nós somos," which is "I am because we are." And I think her echoing that and making sure that Marielle's legacy is shared with the world is a part of what she always does with the privilege she has of being so visible.
There's so many things, but I can think of two in particular. When I was an undergraduate here, in class we didn't read a lot of books about Black women. But I spent a lot of time in the bookstores, and on the table at Harvard Bookstore, there were these little, I think it was Harvard Bookstore, it might have been a store in Central Square. There were these little pamphlets by the Kitchen Table Press, and there was one by Angela, and then Women, Race, and Class, and those books. That Angela is part of the reason why I felt finally like I could embrace feminism, that I could call myself a feminist. That I could recognize the things that I believed in and wanted to see come into being because of those, those things that I read on that book table, or when I had the money, I would buy them. And then the second thing is just her generosity. And not only her generosity on a day-to-day basis. When Erica was talking about Angela giving the woman on the street her jacket, I was like, she's giving me a jacket. She's reaching her closet and giving me a jacket. Yeah, like that. So yes, I recognize that, but also just her generosity with people who we often don't agree with. I will just, before I dismiss anything, well, maybe like there's one person who I think we all know we have to get rid of, but who shall not be named. But mostly a lot of other people, I will reach out and find out what she thinks, because she always believes in people's capacity to grow, to change, to learn, that maybe we can have a conversation. I mean, just that extraordinary generosity is something that I'm still learning from. Yeah.
I guess I would say ditto. I think Angela's kindness and humility. We know the public Angela, and I knew the public Angela before I knew Angela personally, and so there's enormous inspiration there. But just the way she carries that in the world, right? That we were just last night, there was a young boy of 14 or something whose mother wanted him to take a picture with Angela. She was so generous. She asked him a question. She tried to not make him feel awkward. So just that level of kindness, because it's easy sometimes. Revolutionaries want to make the world better, but you don't know who they want to make it better for, because they don't like too many people in it, right? So, but with Angela, no revolutionaries we know. I'm just saying. But Angela reminds you of the importance of kindness and the importance of generosity and the importance of humility. So that's an important lesson. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So we are going to now open this up to questions from our audience. So please feel free to come to the mic and ask us questions. Yes.
Hi, I wanted to say something very particular and then more general. First is that I actually know also about Angela Davis, that she can do a headstand in a full pike, coming all the way down using her abs. It's gorgeous.
And there are photographs.
So there's much to appreciate on this panel. I know I'm playing serious hooky today, and I know a lot of us are. I wanted to appreciate the ways that people have appreciated Gina Dent as a co-teacher and as a friend, gathering material, and as a world traveler. But here's the deal. When I think of Ossie Davis, I think of Ruby Dee. And when I think of Ruby Dee, I think of Ossie Davis. When I think of W.E.B. Du Bois, I think of Shirley Graham Du Bois. And when I think of Shirley Graham Du Bois, I think of W.E.B. Du Bois. When I think of Nelson Mandela, I think of Winnie Mandela, and vice versa. So Gina is a fierce scholar, and she's a transnationalist. But she's also a lover and a partner for 30 years of Angela Davis. So I want to appreciate the Communist Party and the Black liberation struggle, and I also want to appreciate the LGBT struggle and community and what lifelong, lasting love can do to hold and transform us. And you two have done that for each other. Thank you.
Question mark. No more questions.
Hello. My name is Farah. I'm a junior in high school.
Yay.
So I actually moved here 2 years ago. I used to live in Texas, and when I was there, I had a very different perspective on the world than I do now. I used to think that it really was like the man's world. And whenever I thought of Harvard, I thought of, okay, white, rich man, and that's it. I never thought that I can stand here right now and look at people like you and be like, okay, I guess we do belong here. And now that after I moved and I sort of like was introduced to the Harvard community, I was very, very surprised, and I thought I maybe have like a chance in this world to actually do something and be somebody that helps other people and make a change. And I thought, like, for me, in order for me to think like that, I had to actually come here and see amazing people like you guys. But I feel like it's very hard for people who live, like, not only in other parts of the world, but also parts of the country. My cousins, I'm so lucky to have been able to, like, grow up in this country. But my cousins in Egypt, like, if you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, like, they don't have an answer for that. So I want to figure out a way to not only help my friends back in Texas, but also my cousins who really have no dreams or goals in life. I want to be able to help them and help them find their goals and their purpose in life. And I would like to ask for advice from you guys.
Well, I'm going to give a little bit of a cliche answer. Well, thank you for that question. And, we're always, when you said you were a junior, you looked startled when people start clapping. But I mean, we're just glad to hear young, smart, curious people among us. So, I think everybody has dreams and aspirations, and sometimes it takes us a while to articulate them, right? And to embrace them and say them out into the world. Well, first of all of us aren't from Harvard, just so you're clear. And there are a lot of rich white men still at Harvard. So just to say that. But I mean, when you say your cousins in Egypt, I'm thinking of all the amazing, beautiful young people who filled Tahrir Square, in protest to Aus Mubarak. I mean, they all had dreams, and what stood between them and their dreams was, a brutal military regime that came in after, right? One phase and then another. So I would say, for me, I think when I was your age, I found the most sort of hopeful identity by joining a movement, by joining with other people and feeling bigger than what I felt was my very small self at the time, of joining with other people, of defining what we wanted our community to be and then what we wanted the world to be. And that allowed me to dream really big. Now that doesn't have to be their dream, but that's what I'm reminded of when I hear you ask that question.
Thank you. You want to say something, Gina?
First of all, I just want to thank Becky Thompson. I couldn't say anything, so thank you, Becky, for being here and being our friend. I just wanted to say that there's a lesson that we discussed a lot in organizing critical resistance, which was to have people be a part of the movement from wherever they are. And I think, we forget that a lot. I mean, a lot of us are, I can't do, for example, a single organization's work every night anymore. I move around too much. I have a different life. But, so I try to do things from wherever I am. And I think for your friends or your cousins, sometimes instead of kind of feeding people what they should be or should believe, just trying to figure out how to open what they're already engaged in and let that be the basis for being a part of something collectively that can be transformative. And I think for us, I think one of the successes of critical resistance was that so many people who attended that first conference in 98. The 3,500, is that right? 3,500 who attended when there was supposed to be like, what, 400? Something like that. It was really about, nurses and artists and musicians and biologists and whoever, not having to sort of all be the same. I think that can be really difficult, and I think especially when it's US people or people in urban areas or in more elite environments sort of sending the message that, you can be this too, is probably not as welcoming as being able to say, I'm so interested in what you're doing, tell me about it. And it could be something that we don't always think about immediately as political, like sewing or whatever it is, but those things can also be the basis for building a different community together.
I also want to say, and I'm going to have a shout out here to Juliana Richardson. Juliana Richardson, would you stand? She is the founder of the History Makers Digital Archive. And I use that archive in my classes, and I use it in other settings. But you see Angela Davis there. In fact, they've already seen you. They've seen your interview. When Barbara said, I've had these virtual conversations, the really fascinating thing about this digital archive is that there are many people who are courageous, names you know, names you do not know, and you hear their stories. Some of those people are no longer with us. Some of those people are with us, but they're no longer able to tell their stories. I think of Charles Ogletree, for example, the great lawyer. But he's on there, and he's talking about his life. I think great lives inspire us, and I think great lives inspire young people. And they look and they listen, and they want to be like those people. So I would invite you to go online, to go to the History Makers, but to go to other sources, other YouTube voices that are speaking. The quote that I used for the Feminisms was after listening to Angela Davis speak at the University of Chicago for that 2013, you were their speaker. And I heard the entire speech. I do think that there are many ways that we can virtually connect with messages that will lead us into important directions. Another question.
This is going to sound a little simplistic, but I think I want to take an opportunity with the brilliant scholars to answer it. So we're talking about the legacy of Angela Davis redefining feminism, Black feminism specifically. I'd love for you all to tell me why it's important that Black women define themselves as feminists, period.
Let's take that. I just stopped.
It's kind of like, what else is there? I came up during the 70s, and that was like during the, the second wave of feminism. And in my generation, we never knew anything else. It informs everything that I do. That's why I was saying things like, why could John Wick be so fluid in his screen life? And whenever it comes to films about women, they want to just focus on the family and, and the trouble I've seen and all of those types of things. When there's so much more that when we go to films or and read books, we want to be nurtured. We want our minds to be fed with something more than, once again, a single story. Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, I would say, I do want to live in a world without patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And I think that having that as a kind of mobilizing vision for any kind of freedom struggle or liberation struggle that I'm involved in is of utmost importance. And so that's what Black feminism in particular gave me, and it's why I embraced that term and that politics, and why I encourage other women to do the same. Other men, other, as Angela said in that quotation, other kind of genders beyond number and sexualities beyond name. That to me, feminism, as defined by people like Angela, has a vision for the kind of world that I'd like to build, the kind of future that I'd like to see or help bring into being. Yeah.
Well, I would just say, we've seen examples of Black liberation agendas that don't include an anti-heteropatriarchy agenda.
A lot of them.
It's not pretty, okay? And we've seen bourgeois feminism that doesn't include the experiences, the desires, the dreams of Black women, and it's not pretty. So to me, like thinking of a holistic, an ambitious, a robust future and agenda for liberation, I say Black left feminism because I think the anti-capitalist part is really important. So that to me makes me most hopeful. Yeah.
But I would just say one thing, which is that the term, I certainly claim it, and I have for most of my life, but it's also okay with me, especially because I travel around many parts of the world, and I think starting with the term is not necessarily the best thing all the time. Of course, I teach in a department that now has that name, and there was a lot of struggle in not being women and gender studies, but being feminist studies, declaring that we had a political vision, not saying we were just going to describe more things. That was really, really a struggle. And we fought for it, and I think it's mattered a lot. But I also always want to be open to the different ways in which people share values and share struggle and don't define themselves in the same way.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that, Gina, because we have had a long tradition of Black feminists, but they didn't use that word because that word wasn't even usable in the late or in the middle 19th century. But they were. I write about church women who are literally using the Bible to fight for equal rights for women, all in every way. But I also want to say that there is a historically, looking at the late 20th century, a real effort on the part of women such as Alice Walker and other women to use the word womanist. In fact, I think at Spelman, you're either having or you did have a conversation about that word. But I think for Black feminists, the issue is certainly we are fighting for the rights of women. And I never want to leave out men, because Frederick Douglass was one of the greatest feminists ever. But at the same time, Black women have had to struggle against racism. And so sometimes the word feminist just connotes certain bourgeois, white, women, middle class ideas that don't lend themselves to Black women of any class, much less working class Black women. So I think the word itself has certain tensions, but I do think we understand when we use the word feminist that we are talking about the rights of women, no matter their sexuality, the rights of women, no matter where they are. Because when you say the home, you could be in the home and still demand equal rights in your own home. So it's everywhere.
I'll just add a footnote to that, to Evelyn. So I think that's why the modifiers are important. Like I rarely say just feminist. I add something to it precisely to debunk that notion that we're talking about bourgeois feminism, and that's what I'm sort of trying to say. In terms of Angela's whole body of work has been to rescue from that. You know what I mean? So we shouldn't have that skewed notion of feminism leaves out all this work that has gone on, and it's just so important.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jackie. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. I have a related question about feminism, and this kind of comes from I was listening to a podcast where Professor Ransby, you were on a panel about intersectionality, and you said that one thing that sometimes is missing
Quote me now.
from an intersectional analysis is an analysis of class. And I really appreciate that you said Black feminist struggle is also anti-capitalist struggle. And so one thing that I definitely take away from my feminist community is a reframing of what counts as labor, not just looking at productive labor, looking at domestic labor, looking at unwaged labor as well. So this is really also a question for the entire panel. What working class black feminist movements do you think are historical examples that we can look to? Thank you.
Well, I mean, for me, as I wrote a book years ago called Righteous Discontent, and even though many people think I'm talking about, when you say the church, I'm talking about middle-class women, but I'm not in the Baptist church anyway. So these are maids, these are domestic servants, but they are fighting for their rights. They put out in 1913 a statement, a 7-point manifesto, what we want, what we must have. And when you listen to and these are overwhelmingly now, domestic servants, they use language like, we are the women God made more of than the other kind. and they will argue for things that we are absolutely arguing for today. The equality of the vote, getting rid of convict leasing, more humane prisons and reform in the prison. Then they're asking for, basic civil rights like the end to Jim Crow, having their streets paved, because just the environment in which you live creates health hazards, it creates all kinds of environmental racism. So these are working class women, and they're women, Tara Hunter writes about working class women who are, again, many of them maids, but they're fighting for the right to have control over their bodies. So we have these stories in our history. I think we need to know more about those stories, and to hear, again, I'm gonna call back to the history makers, because there's a search. You can just search and put in there radical women, or just any kind of search that will get, and you'll see these people who you've never heard of before, and they're talking about their experiences growing up, and you realize that all over this nation, there are people who have been struggling against the things that Angela Davis stands for. Or, she stands for the things that people are struggling for. I should say it that way.
I'd like to recommend, a few of us have mentioned someone who's in the audience, Primilla Nadesan, and so students here, I'd like to recommend, I had to look up the exact title, but two of Primilla's books, Welfare Warriors, about the women who organized for the welfare rights movement, I think might address that question, and also Household Workers Unite, African American women who built a movement, that I think that you will find exactly the kind of information you're looking for there.
Yeah, and to add, and Robin Spencer and the women of the Black Panther Party, I don't think most of those women were hardly bourgeois women, so yeah.
I was going to mention Primilla also. I think I'm glad Farah did, but I also wanted to say, today, there are, three formations that I think are important, not perfect, but important, that have Black working class women at the center. One is the Movement for Black Lives, which comes out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's not necessarily the names that you know, but young people who were on the streets of Ferguson and Baltimore and so forth that have tried to keep the spirit of that alive. There are people who, grew up in the projects, who's, have relatives in prison, and who experience what working class families experience because they are from working class communities. Left Roots is a political project, a new left sort of political project with, very working class intellectuals at the center, people like Tanya Lee and others. And then an interesting experiment with the Working Families Party, and I'm arguing with them about some things right now, so I'm not completely down, but I love the leadership that Mo Mitchell comes out of a Black working class experience in New York City represent for that, and Leni Stamp represent for that organization. So when we're looking for working class organizations, there's a welfare rights movement and National Domestic Workers and a number of organizations, but there's also people with working class politics, consciousness, and background in the organizations that are not explicitly, defining themselves in that way. Although if you look at their politics, it's reflected there. Who?
I was actually,
and unions.
yeah.
I mean, the teacher strike now, Stacey Davis Gates and Jennifer Johnson are two of the most important leaders, of the teacher strike. SEIU has very powerful women in leadership, Jackie Algie and others. So yeah.
Yes, to all of that. I just want to mention one thing, which is, since I'm on the theme of Brazil today, one of the things that Angela and I were so astonished to learn about was the unionization of domestic workers in Brazil. And I have been deeply interested in aligning with them and following their struggles. And someone came up to me, actually, I don't even think I told you this, at the last time we were there, saying how important Angela's essay, The Role of Black Women in the Community of Slaves, was, because there are so many Black workers living in white homes doing labor. And so that work for them was very inspirational, and their work has been very inspirational for us.
Thank you for this incredible panel. I'm still reeling from it. And our entire morning sessions, I think we have a lot to think about and discuss over lunch. We ask that you leave the room. Doors will reopen here at 1:15. We'll begin promptly at 2 p.m. And in the meantime, we encourage you to head over to the gallery in the Schlesinger Library to view Angela Davis, Freed by the People. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again at 2.